What if I told you that federal law enforcement's highest-ranking official was beaten unconscious by local cops who had no idea they were destroying their own careers? Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone knew who you really were? Have you witnessed someone being treated differently because of the color of their skin? Well, what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, assumptions, and justice. On a busy Thursday evening in downtown Detroit, the streets buzz with commuters heading home after long workdays. Among them walked Martin Steele, a distinguished man in his 50s wearing a simple gray suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another office worker eager to get home to his family. But Martin Steele was far from ordinary. After 30 years of dedicated service, he had just been appointed regional director of one of the most powerful federal agencies in the country. His quiet demeanor and unassuming presence masked a career spent protecting communities and upholding the very principles of justice that were about to be tested in the most brutal way. What these local officers didn't know would send shockwaves through the entire law enforcement community. If stories about justice and accountability resonate with you, smash that like button right now. Martin had spent 14 hours at the federal building that day, reviewing case files that would reshape how his agency approached community relations. His briefcase contained classified documents outlining new initiatives to bridge the gap between federal law enforcement and local communities, work that felt more crucial than ever in today's climate. As he approached the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Griswold Street, Martin checked his phone. A text from his wife. "Dinner's getting cold. Drive safe." He smiled, quickening his pace toward a parking garage where his modest Honda Civic waited. The light turned red just as he reached the crosswalk. Martin stood quietly, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, when two patrol cars pulled up to the intersection. Officers Jake Morrison and Tony Rodriguez had been partners for 3 years, working the evening shift in downtown's busiest district. Morrison noticed Martin immediately. Something about the man's stillness bothered him. In his experience, people who stood that calmly usually had something to hide. "Look at this guy," Morrison muttered to Rodriguez, nodding toward Martin. "Just standing there, expensive briefcase, nice suit. Probably some drug dealer, trying to look respectable." Rodriguez glanced over. The assumption came naturally. They'd made similar judgments countless times before. "Think we should check him out?" Martin sensed their attention, but continued looking straight ahead. 30 years in federal service had taught him to read situations quickly. The officers' body language, their whispered conversation, the way they positioned their vehicle. He knew what was coming. The light turned green. But instead of driving through, Morrison pulled a patrol car to the curb and stepped out. "Excuse me, sir," Morrison called out, his hand already resting on his belt. "We need to have a word with you." Martin turned slowly, his expression calm and professional. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" The question seemed to irritate Morrison. In his mind, only guilty people asked if there was a problem. But Martin knew something these officers didn't, and that knowledge was about to become the most expensive lesson of their careers. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Morrison lied smoothly, stepping closer to Martin. "Mind if we search that briefcase?" Martin remained perfectly still, his voice steady and professional. "Officers, I haven't committed any crime. I'm simply waiting to cross the street to get to my car." Rodriguez joined his partner, flanking Martin's other side. "That sounds like resistance to me. You got something to hide in that case." The evening crowd began to slow their pace, sensing tension. A few people pulled out phones. Others crossed the street to avoid the confrontation. Martin noticed a gathering audience, but knew that revealing his identity now might only escalate the situation. "I'm not resisting anything," Martin said calmly. "I'm exercising my constitutional rights." Those words triggered something in Morrison. "Constitutional rights?" he sneered. "You think you're some kind of lawyer?" What happened next shocked everyone watching. Morrison grabbed Martin's arm and spun him around, slamming him face first against the nearest building wall. The briefcase fell to the ground, its contents scattering across the sidewalk. "Stop resisting." Morrison shouted, though Martin hadn't moved. Rodriguez joined in, driving his knee into Martin's back while Morrison pressed his face against the brick. Bystanders gasped as they watched a man in a business suit being brutalized for no apparent reason. Martin made a choice that would define the next hour of his life. He went limp, offering no resistance despite every instinct screaming at him to fight back. His federal training kicked in. Document everything, survive the encounter, seek justice through proper channels. The beating intensified. Punches to his ribs, his kidneys, his head. Blood ran down Martin's face as he absorbed blow after blow. His 30 years of service meaning nothing to these officers who saw only what they wanted to see. The crowd grew larger, phones recording every second of the assault. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you witnessed this injustice happening right in front of you? 20 minutes later, Martin sat in the back of the patrol car, his suit torn, blood dry on his face, but his mind sharp as ever. Morrison and Rodriguez drove in silence, already crafting their version of events. A story about a suspicious man who resisted arrest and became violent. At the 12th precinct, they hauled Martin to the booking area like a trophy. Other officers glanced over with mild interest. Just another arrest on a busy Thursday night. "What V we got here?" asked Sergeant Lisa Chun, the desk supervisor with 15 years on the force. Suspicious individual, resisting arrest, assault on officer. Morrison rattled off his fabricated charges while Rodriguez nodded along. Martin said nothing. Not yet. The booking process began routinely. Fingerprints, photos, personal effects inventory. When they reached his wallet, Officer Janet Mills, handling the paperwork, pulled out Martin's identification cards one by one. Driver's license, credit cards, AAA membership. Nothing unusual. Then she found it. Her face went white as she stared at the federal credentials in her hands. She read them twice, then looked up at Martin's battered face, then back at the ID. Sergeant Chun?" Mills' voice cracked. "We have a problem. A big problem." Chun walked over, irritation in her stride. "What now, Mills?" Mills handed over credentials without a word. Chen's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to absolute horror as she read. "Martin R. Steele, Regional Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The booking area went dead silent. Morrison, who had been bragging to another officer about his arrest, turned at the sudden quiet. "Chun," he asked nervously, "everything okay?" Chen's hand shook as she held up the badge and ID. "This is FBI Regional Director Martin. Steele, you just beat up one of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials in the state." Morrison's face drained of all color. Rodriguez stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent station. Martin finally spoke, his voice calm despite his injuries. "Gentlemen, I believe we need to have a conversation with your captain, and you're going to want to call the FBI field office. They'll be very interested in tonight's events. Share this story if you believe no one, no matter who they are, should face this kind of treatment." Within 30 minutes, the 12th precinct transformed into chaos. Captain Robert Hayes burst through the doors after receiving the most terrifying phone call of his career. Behind him came FBI Assistant Director Maria Santos and a team of federal agents who looked like they meant business. The videos from bystanders had already hit social media. Hashtag FBI Director Beaten was trending nationwide within hours. The footage was clear, damning, and impossible to explain away. Federal law enforcement's top regional official being brutalized by local officers who assumed he was powerless. Morrison and Rodriguez sat in an interrogation room, their careers officially over before the paperwork was even filed. Morrison kept repeating, "How are we supposed to know?" while Rodriguez stared at the wall in stunned silence. Captain Hayes faced the media storm of his life. Reporters gathered outside the precinct, demanding answers about how his officers could assault a federal director. The police union released a statement distancing themselves from the incident before the ink was dry on the arrest report. But Martin's response surprised everyone. Standing before the cameras with his injuries still visible, he didn't call for revenge or massive lawsuits. Instead, he spoke about systemic issues and the need for change. "This incident isn't about me personally," Martin said, his voice steady despite the bandages. It's about what happens every day to people who don't have federal badges to protect them. Tonight, I experience what countless Americans face when they're judged by their appearance rather than their character. The federal investigation moved swiftly. Morrison and Rodriguez were suspended without pay, facing federal charges for violating Martin's civil rights. But the consequences went deeper than two officers losing their jobs. The Department of Justice announced a comprehensive review of the Detroit Police Department's training procedures. Body camera footage from other incidents involving Morrison and Rodriguez revealed a pattern of excessive force, particularly against minorities. Community leaders who have been fighting for police reform suddenly had the most powerful ally they could have asked for, an FBI director who had experienced police brutality firsthand. The incident became a catalyst for change that went far beyond one evening's brutality. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected sources. 6 months later, officers Morrison and Rodriguez were sentenced to federal prison for civil rights violations. Morrison received 4 years, Rodriguez 3. Their police careers ended in disgrace, their pensions forfeited, their reputations destroyed by their own prejudice and violence. But Martin's real victory wasn't their punishment. It was the change that followed. The Detroit Police Department implemented mandatory de-escalation training and bias recognition programs. Body cameras became required equipment, not optional accessories. Martin established a bridge initiative, using his position to create dialogue between federal agencies and local communities. He spoke at police academies across the country, sharing his story not for sympathy, but as a warning about the cost of assumptions. That night taught me something profound. Martin told a packed auditorium of new recruits. Every person you encounter could be someone's parent, someone's child, someone's hero. They deserve dignity not because of their job title or federal badge, but because they're human. The intersection where Martin was attacked now bears a small plaque recognizing his work in police reform. Children pass it daily on their way to school, unaware that one man's worst night became a community's catalyst for change. Martin continues his federal service with renewed purpose, carrying physical scars that remind him daily why his work matters. His experience became proof that even those sworn to protect aren't immune to injustice, and that real change comes when power is used to lift others up. Subscribe for more stories that demand justice and change, and hit that notification bell, because next week, we're sharing how a janitor's secret identity brought down an entire corporate empire.